Imagine a group of powerful businessmen, titans of industry who control vast fortunes, gathering in secret. These men, who wielded immense influence over the economy and politics, were not content with their already substantial power. They had a vision, a dark and dangerous vision to reshape the very fabric of the nation. Conspiring to overthrow the President of the United States, their goal was not just to remove a leader they disagreed with but to fundamentally alter the course of American democracy. They sought to install a regime that would serve their interests, a government that would prioritize their wealth and power above all else. It sounds like a scene ripped from a Hollywood thriller, yet this was the startling reality of 1933. The plot, known as the business plot, was a brazen attempt to subvert the democratic process and impose a fascist dictatorship on the United States. It was a scheme so audacious that it seemed almost unbelievable. This is the story of the business plot, a shocking attempt to stage a coup d'etat on American soil and replace President Franklin D. Roosevelt with a fascist dictatorship. Roosevelt, who had just begun his New Deal programs to lift the country out of the Great Depression, was seen as a threat to the established order by these powerful businessmen. This chilling plot, revealed in a congressional hearing, sent shockwaves through the nation. The hearings brought to light the extent of the conspiracy and the influential figures behind it. The testimonies were damning, exposing a network of wealthy elites who were willing to go to any lengths to protect their interests. The very idea that a group of wealthy elites would even contemplate such a treasonous act was unfathomable to many. The American public, already reeling from the economic hardships of the Great Depression, was now faced with the terrifying reality that their democracy was under threat from within. Yet, the evidence presented, including startling testimonies from those involved, painted a clear picture of a nation on the brink. The plotters had approached retired Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, hoping to use his popularity and influence to rally support for their cause. Butler, however, was a patriot and exposed the plot to Congress. The audacity of the business plot and the subsequent lack of accountability for those involved raises unsettling questions about the fragility of democracy. Despite the overwhelming evidence, no one was prosecuted, and the incident was largely swept under the rug. This lack of justice left many wondering about the true power dynamics at play, questions that resonate even today, almost a century later. The business plot serves as a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers to democratic institutions. It highlights the need for vigilance and the importance of holding those in power accountable, regardless of their wealth or status. It serves as a stark reminder that the preservation of freedom requires constant vigilance against those who would seek to exploit power for their own gain. The story of the business plot is a cautionary tale, a reminder that democracy is fragile and must be protected by the people, for the people. The year was 1933. It was a time of great turmoil and uncertainty, a period that would be remembered as one of the darkest in American history. America was in the throes of the Great Depression, a devastating economic downturn that had begun in 1929 and showed no signs of abating. The once thriving cities and towns were now shadows of their former selves, with businesses shuttered and streets eerily quiet. A period of unprecedented economic hardship. Families were torn apart by the strain, and the American dream seemed like a cruel joke to many. The despair was palpable, and the future looked bleak. The stock market crash of 1929 had sent shockwaves through the global economy, causing a domino effect that crippled industries and wiped out fortunes overnight. The financial institutions that people had trusted crumbled, leaving a void of uncertainty and fear, leaving millions unemployed and desperate. Breadlines stretched for blocks, a stark reminder of the widespread hunger and need. People who had once enjoyed comfortable lives now found themselves in a daily struggle for survival, and the specter of poverty loomed large over the nation. Shanty towns, derisively called Hoovervilles after President Hoover, sprang up on the outskirts of cities, housing those who had lost everything. The American landscape was marred by these makeshift communities. The American people were looking for a savior, someone who could restore their faith and bring back prosperity. They yearned for a leader who could offer them a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Someone to lift them out of the abyss. The collective desperation created a fertile ground for new ideas and bold promises. People were willing to believe in anyone who could offer a solution, no matter how radical. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, promising hope and a new deal for the American people, emerged as a beacon of hope. His charismatic presence and reassuring words resonated with a populace desperate for change. Was swept into office in 1932. His election was a landslide victory, a clear mandate from the people who believed in his vision for a better future. The celebrations were jubilant, filled with a renewed sense of optimism. His election signaled a dramatic shift in American politics, away from laissez-faire economics and towards a more active role for the federal government in providing relief and recovery. Roosevelt's progressive policies, which included Social Security, unemployment insurance, and public works programs, aimed to rebuild the nation from the ground up. These initiatives were designed to provide immediate relief to those in need, create jobs, and stimulate economic growth. The New Deal was a bold experiment in governance and public works programs, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration, which put millions of Americans back to work. These programs not only provided employment but also improved the nation's infrastructure. Were met with fierce opposition from wealthy industrialists and financiers. They saw Roosevelt's policies as a direct threat to their interests and a challenge to the status quo that had long favored them. They viewed his New Deal as a threat to their wealth and power, fearing that the redistribution of wealth and increased government intervention would undermine their control over the economy. A dangerous step towards socialism. The rhetoric grew increasingly heated, with accusations of socialism and communism being hurled at Roosevelt and his supporters. The nation was deeply divided. It was in this climate of fear and uncertainty that the seeds of the business plot were sown. The plot, a conspiracy to overthrow the government and install a fascist regime, was a reflection of the extreme measures some were willing to consider to protect their interests. The masterminds behind the business plot were not fringe radicals, but rather prominent figures in American society. These were men who had long been at the helm of America's economic engine, steering the course of industries and shaping the financial landscape of the nation. They were the titans of industry, the barons of business, whose names were synonymous with power and influence. Their wealth and status afforded them a level of control that few could challenge, and they were accustomed to having their way in the corridors of power. They were captains of industry, Wall Street tycoons, and influential financiers who had amassed fortunes through shrewd business practices and strategic investments. These individuals were not just wealthy, they were the architects of the American economic system, the very foundation upon which the nation's prosperity was built. Their influence extended beyond the boardrooms and into the political arena, where they wielded significant power over policy and decision-making, and powerful business leaders who had benefited immensely from the laissez-faire policies of previous administrations. These policies had allowed them to operate with minimal government interference, maximizing their profits and expanding their empires. They thrived in an environment where the market was king, and their success was a testament to their ability to navigate and manipulate the economic landscape to their advantage. These men, accustomed to dictating the terms of their own success, felt increasingly marginalized by Roosevelt's New Deal. The New Deal represented a seismic shift in the relationship between the government and the private sector, introducing regulations and reforms that threatened to curtail their power and redistribute wealth. For these industrial magnates, the New Deal was not just a political agenda, it was an existential threat to their way of life. Among the key figures implicated in the plot were Grayson MP Murphy, a Wall Street financier. Murphy was a man of considerable influence, with deep connections in both the financial and political spheres. His involvement in the plot underscored the seriousness of the threat posed by these conspirators. William Doyle, a former commander of the American Legion. Doyle's military background lent a veneer of respectability to the plot, and his leadership experience made him a valuable asset to the conspirators. His role in the American Legion also provided a network of potential supporters who could be mobilized to support the coup. And Robert Sterling Clark, an heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune. Clark's wealth and social standing made him a key player in the plot, and his financial resources were crucial in funding the conspirators' activities. His involvement highlighted the extent to which the plot was supported by some of the most powerful and affluent individuals in the country. Their motives were far from patriotic. These men were not driven by a sense of duty to their country or a desire to protect the American way of life. Instead, their actions were motivated by a deep-seated fear of losing their wealth and influence. They saw Roosevelt's reforms as a direct attack on their interests, and they were willing to go to great lengths to preserve their privileged position. They feared Roosevelt's reforms would erode their wealth and influence, undermining the economic system that had allowed them to thrive. The New Deal's emphasis on social welfare and economic regulation was anathema to their belief in unfettered capitalism. They viewed these reforms as a slippery slope towards socialism, a system they believed would strip them of their power and control. And they yearned for a return to the days of unfettered capitalism, even if it meant dismantling the very democracy that had allowed them to prosper. They longed for a time when their authority was unchallenged, and their decisions were not subject to government oversight. In their eyes, the preservation of their wealth and power justified any means, including the subversion of democratic principles. Inspired by the rise of fascism in Europe, particularly the regimes of Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany, they saw an opportunity to implement a similar system in the United States. Fascism, with its emphasis on strong centralized authority and suppression of dissent, appealed to their desire for control and stability. They believed that such a system would protect their interests and ensure their continued dominance. The conspirators believed that a similar system of authoritarian rule could be established in the United States. They envisioned a government that would operate in their favor, free from the constraints of democratic processes and public accountability. This new order would prioritize their needs and safeguard their wealth, creating a society where their power was absolute. They envisioned a government led by a powerful dictator, a figurehead who would enforce their will and maintain the status quo. This leader would be a puppet, controlled by the industrialists and financiers who had orchestrated the coup. In this new regime, the interests of the elite would take precedence over the needs of the general populace. A puppet leader who would do their bidding and protect their interests. This vision of authoritarian rule was a stark departure from the democratic ideals upon which the United States was founded. It represented a dangerous convergence of economic power and political ambition, driven by a desire to maintain control at any cost. The business plot was a chilling reminder of the lengths to which some would go to preserve their privilege and influence. At the center of this web of intrigue stood a highly decorated Marine Corps Major General, Smedley Darlington Butler. A two-time recipient of the Medal of Honor, Butler was a national hero, renowned for his bravery and military prowess. Yet, after a long and distinguished career, Butler had grown disillusioned with war and the unchecked power of the military-industrial complex. In the summer of 1933, Butler received a visit from Gerald McGuire, a former leader of the Connecticut American Legion and a Wall Street bond salesman. McGuire, acting on behalf of the conspirators, approached Butler with a proposition. They wanted him, with his military credentials and popular appeal, to lead a force of 500,000 veterans in a march on Washington, D.C. The conspirators believed that Butler, with his charisma and influence over veterans, could be used to intimidate Roosevelt and force him to either resign or cede power to a new, more business-friendly administration. They grossly underestimated Butler's character and patriotism. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share for more fascinating historical insights.